Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's been an interesting discussion. There's no doubt about it. We've talked about executive compensation. We've talked about a problem that arose, a specific problem that arose when Senator Dodd put that language in the bill in the middle of the night in the spending bill. The interesting thing about it, Mr. Chairman, is that the bill to remove that language is 11 lines long. It's just 11 lines long. It's not 6 pages long. So if we were to do what some in this body on the other side say, the only thing we're here to do to remove that language, it would be H.R. 1673 from Mr. Lundgren. That's the bill that would remove the 11 lines that make it so that that backroom deal for AIG executives would be stricken. So I think it's important that we appreciate what's going on here. I appreciate the comments from the gentleman from California who did indeed, I think, appropriately describe what was in the bill. It's important that our colleagues look at this bill. It's not too long, 6 pages. We can indeed read it. I hope some of my colleagues will read it. The title of the bill, to amend executive compensation and to prohibit unreasonable and excessive compensation and compensation not based on performance standards. Now, when you read the bill and get to who's going to define all that, which is really the question, Mr. Chairman, who's going to define that? Usually we think that in a market economy, in the United States economy, in the economy that has allowed more success and more opportunity for more individuals than any nation in the history of mankind, that the way that we define compensation and performance in the market is in the private market, not in the government. So on page 3 it says that no payment would be able to go or provide for compensation that is unreasonable or excessive as defined in standards established by the Secretary. The Secretary of the Treasury is going to tell us what is unreasonable and what is quality performance. Well, Secretary of the Treasury, let's look at his biography, Mr. Chairman. Oh, my goodness, he's the 9th President and Chief Executive Officer of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, which began when he began his service there in 2003. It's a wonderful job. But what experience does he have in setting compensation? In fact, what experience does the government have in setting compensation? He first joined the Department of the Treasury in 1988. Now, let me think a moment, Mr. Chairman. That means 21 years of service for the Department of the Treasury or in the federal government. Well, that's wonderful, and he's to be commended for it. But what experience does he have, and why would the nation want him to be deciding what compensation and performance standards are for this nation? Maybe it was in his education. Went to Dartmouth College, bachelor's degree in government and agent studies in 1983. Wonderful institution, great study. International studies and masters in international economics and East Asian studies in 1985. Mr. Chairman, not to slight the Secretary of the Treasury, but the American people do not believe that the Secretary of the Treasury ought to be setting compensation limits for anybody. And why? Why does all this feel so strange? It's because we're in a political economy. We're no longer in the market economy that the American people know and love and embrace. What does a political economy look like? Well, the gentleman from California described it. He said, because of the disclosure provisions, the American people who are putting up the money have a right to know. Well, sure, they have a right to know. But that's not what a market economy is. He says that you ought to have the people have a right to know and set the limits because this is capitalism. No, capitalism was bastardized a year or more ago when we started down this road that, Mr. Chairman, I opposed at every step of the way because we pointed out then this is where we'd get. We would get to be debating on the floor of this House what kind of compensation members in the private sector ought to have. Well, Mr. Chairman, that's a dangerous place to be. It's a dangerous place to be because it leads presidents to thinking that they can remove CEOs from private companies. That's where it leads to. It leads members of Congress to believe that they can call on the Treasury Department to get money out of previous bills that have been passed in Congress, even though the institution in their district doesn't qualify under the rules that have been provided. Mr. Chairman, it's a dangerous place to be. And it violates the Constitution. I know it's a quaint document, Mr. Chairman, and we don't think about it much anymore, but Article 1, Section 9 says no bill of attainder or ex post facto law shall be passed. Mr. Chairman, this bill is each. Mr. Chairman, this is a bad step. It's a bad and a dangerous step for this Congress. It adds to the dangerous and reckless policies of this administration that the American people recognize as not being consistent with American fundamental principles, with the market principles that have made this nation the greatest nation in the history of mankind. Mr. Chairman, I urge my colleagues to recognize this bill for what it is, and that is a bill that this Congress ought not adopt. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Price.